This is the first talk that I'm going to give, which actually is starting ahead of time. So maybe I'll conclude that I have that extra 5 minutes now. No, I don't get it, huh? I have all the time. Thank you. So you don't get dinner. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be at TAPME. I went around the campus, extremely impressive, no lesser, and maybe better than a lot of business schools I have lectured in or visited around the world. Students especially were fascinating. I met a couple of them with a real life experience of what making money is all about. So I was just joking with them and telling, I'm going to tell them now in this lecture how to spend that money wisely. After all, management schools have to teach you how to spend money too. And so I'm going to talk very differently, something very, very different. Today's topic, like Professor Natarajan said, is, to me, Manipal is a reflection of the topic itself. So I don't really have to, it's like carrying water to the river. But still, I would like to bring in concepts which I feel every young Indian needs to hear. Every young Indian who believes that he or she is part of creating a resurgent India. And I use the word resurgent specifically and intentionally because the India that we had has to be brought back. I'm not an emotional activist of the past, but like Swami Vivekananda said, there were a lot of great things in the past, there are a lot of bad things too. Resurgent India needs to look back at the history that we had, drop out that rubbish that we could have dropped out a long time ago, but hold on to something which is essentially Indian. And that's exactly what I'd like to share with all of you today. And what that Indian was not this unnecessary debate that we are having about whether zero was discovered in India, whether we flew from planet to planet. I think all that is irrelevant. What really matters was that India had the social and the human capital that could have made us all proud, and that's exactly what we don't have today. So I would like to start off with narrating a few experiences that just happened to me coincidentally. Some of them are very old, some of them are as recent as 2 months ago. Last semester, after finishing my teaching at Cornell, as is what most professors I suppose do anywhere in the world, I asked one of my students to drop me back to the airport. And as he was driving, I've now stopped driving there, and obviously I didn't want to rent a car for the sake of getting dropped to the airport. So the student of mine was driving me. And I suddenly remembered that some of my students in Mysore, we run a master's course called Masters in Development Management, where I try to create leaders of development. And some of these young students, well, on the day I left, very jovially asked me, you go give your students knowledge there, you at least get chocolates for us when you come back. So I suddenly remembered that on the way I saw a Walmart, and I told my young student, why don't you just stop for a few minutes, let me just buy some chocolates on the way out. Because buying chocolates at the airport is dangerous, because it is 4 times the cost of Walmart. So typical Indian calculation, I thought it is cheaper to go there. And the moment I said it, this 19, 20-year-old or maybe 21, it's a graduate student, it's a 21, 22-year-old student, he was outraged. He was not outraged because a professor asked him to stop at Walmart. He was outraged that a person like me would even get into Walmart. And I just couldn't figure it out. I said, what's wrong? After all, buying chocolates, what does it matter? He said, I'll take you to the Target opposite, but not into this Walmart. I was fascinated. A small town, I call it Ithaca is like Manipal. It's tucked away outside the mainstream New York, somewhere out there. The Cornell is known, Ithaca, the place where Cornell is hardly known. And even to find a Walmart there is a big thing. And this boy just refused to even take me inside. And I asked him why. He said, what the hell do you mean? We all respect you a lot. Don't make my respect for you come down by taking you into Walmart. And then he added one more sentence. You enter Walmart and come out with a Walmart bag, you can't come back to campus next semester. It seemed more like a threat than like friendly advice. And I had to listen to it. I was wondering what happened. But out of respect for that young boy, I said, okay, after all, it is his car. So I said, let's go over to Target. I don't mind buying it there. And I bought it. I just left. For a minute, I didn't process what happened. I just let it go there. But just a little before that, before I left from here, we had just finished our Ganesha festival, and for some reason the local MP of Mysore had come down to meet me to discuss something. And first time young man, 34 years old, first time getting elected to parliament, obviously he's overwhelmed by parliament and all that. So in the cultural shock of being a hard-hitting journalist to being a quiet pussycat in parliament is a big change for him. And he was asking me and telling me about the challenges of being an MP after 2 months of being elected. I thought at least it takes 3-4 terms to become a problem. But then within 2 months he said, in Kannada he said, Yakappa elect aade anspurtu. These guys spend crores and then he laments about it 2 months later. And I asked him why. And his explanation was so simple. He said, the recent Ganesha festival, I must have had at least 30 or 40 young boys come to me in different groups of 5, 6, and say, we are having a Ganesha Utsav in my street, please give us money. And this man was wondering, he thought I knew because I had spent a lot of time training him on the role and responsibilities of an MP. And he said, in the discussion that you had, you never told me one of my roles was to give money for Ganesh Utsavs. I can understand making laws, going to parliament, debating policy, but not about Ganesh Utsav. And he said, I offered each group 1,000 rupees. Most of them grumbled, but one group was very vocal and said, what nonsense, why do you think we have to come this far to get 1,000 rupees from you? We have already fixed our quota, MP 25,000, MLA 15,000. And this was shocked. He said, do you know my salary? He asked these young boys, he said, do you know my salary? And they said, we don't care. Who lives on salary nowadays? And this guy was telling me, now I know why we can't be honest in politics. He left it at that. I'll just talking of the separate incidents. These all look very disparate, separate, unconnected incidents, unconnected to the topic of the day. But let me explain to you, it's extremely connected. If this was just a few months ago, many years ago when I lived in the forest of the tribals, I was sort of the chief arbitrator of all problems amongst tribal communities, because there were a lot of different anthropological groups, so there will always be internecine tensions. I was also the arbitrator between tribals and non-tribals. So the non-tribal rich landlords never for a moment imagine why they are rich and why they have such land, and why are the tribals poor and why are they always laborers. Now the moment I said tribal, we all have a stereotype, the poor, exploited, impoverished man, which is true. We never ask why but. And the tribals would come and complain about the exploitation the farmers do, and the farmer would come and complain, please tell your tribals, they come at 9 o'clock in the morning, they're supposed to come at 8 o'clock. As soon as they come in, they ask for tea. By the time it is 11 o'clock, they want tea again. 1 o'clock lunch, 4 o'clock they want to get back home. Is this the way to work? The undercurrent story I'm trying to bring out is this enormous suspicion and mutual dislike, but absolutely obligatory dependency on each other. They tolerate each other. They can't do without each other. The tribal needs the landlord needs the tribal laborer. But this inherent distrust on them. As though this was not enough, after I just came back, why I started processing was this. The reason why I'm giving this talk. I landed back and a very dear friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, we both go to the gym together, we spend a lot of time interacting with each other. This man, my age, was sick for a month. When the time I was teaching there, he was very sick and he had just not got himself examined properly. I come back and I told him, why didn't you go to a doctor? He's a pharmacist. He runs Mysore's largest chain of pharmaceutical chemist shops. Very well to do, very well known. The shop itself is his great-grandfather, somebody started it more than 80, 90 years old. A legacy of pharmaceutical name, a family in that city. And I asked him, how can you be so stupid? You're a qualified pharmacist, you're an MBA graduate also, and you don't even feel like going to a doctor? And his immediate spontaneous reply was, I was waiting for you to come. I said, what do? I haven't practiced clinical medicine for the last 15 years now. If you want to write your obituary, you should get treated by me. You don't get treated by me because I'm a very intelligent doctor or anything like that. My medicine is 30 years old. My practice is 15 years old. And he said, no, But what I want you with me is not for your clinical knowledge, but what I want you with me is because if you are there around, I'm hoping the doctors who examine me will not lie. And I thought maybe he's talking about the diagnosis. Maybe he's got cancer and people will tell him he's got cancer. Because that's what I suspected. He said, no, I'm not worried about the cancer. He said, I'm a pharmacist. I know what I dispense in my shop every day. 90% of prescriptions that come to me are junk. I just give them because the doctor writes it. And I am worried if I go to a doctor, I may be given something which I should not be taking in the first place at all. And now I'm going to be troubled. Should I take it? Should I not take it? I am worried whether the doctor will give me a battery of tests which are absolutely irrelevant for me, but I have to end up doing because the machine has to run. The CT has to be used, the MRI has to be used. Somebody has to use them, right? So it's not a question of whether the patient needs it. It's a question of whether the machine is used or not used. And this man couldn't trust a community on whose his own existence depends on that community and that community to prescribe. Now these 4 incidents seem very unconnected and all over the place. Every one of these incidents, the first thing that you can pick up as young students would be, if you have a little bit of research bent of mind, is the economic thread that is connecting all of them. Walmart, these young students in America have decided across many universities that they would boycott Walmart. It's a very simple protest. They say we don't like their labor practices, we don't like what they do to sweatshops in India, China, Vietnam, other places. We just won't go buy. There's a new culture of young men and women growing in the United States who have made up their minds that even if they get something cheaper, in our country it's a challenge because even I would, if something is 10 paise cheaper, I'll go there. That's how we are all trained. Our DNA is wired differently. But these young men and women decide that they will not shop in Walmart only because they don't approve of Walmart's practices. And they say the only way Walmart will learn is cause economic consequences on Walmart. So the economic thread. The member of parliament's economic calculations of the cost of a vote and the amount of money he has spent and the cost of re-election next time, being a fresh MP this time, he can get away with saying, I will only give 1,000 rupees. As the elections approach, his investment costs go up and then it has to go to 25,000 rupees. Otherwise, he will never get re-elected. There are costs to it. We all look at economics very easily because we are trained to look at money. The tribal farmer looks at the daily wage he gets. The landlord looks at the wages he loses and not getting return on investment for the money he puts in. Again, economics, easy to calculate. My friend is worried about the economics not because he can't afford to pay, the economics of running hospitals today. 80% or higher hospitals in this country are run not because patients need them, because hospital managements have to keep the hospital running. That is what we train our hospital managers for. Recently, a friend of mine working in a very prestigious, I won't name them for want of decency, for sake of decency of I'm protecting the identity of certain people, wrote to me from Delhi saying that he resigned from the army, a very, very well-qualified cardiothoracic surgeon, built in the traditions of the Indian army, never knew a world outside. Poor man, after his retirement, went and joined a large corporate entity in Delhi, and he writes to me saying, oh my God, and that's how his letter starts. He says, I thought your lectures were lectures. The first month, the salary that this hospital offered me looked like my 30 years of earning. I was so impressed that people can pay such kind of money to me. The next month, a little 22-year-old comes to me and she says, I am the tracking manager. I was wondering, what new title? How do you have a tracking manager in a hospital? And he said, I didn't know what it was. And then I very innocently asked her, what do you track? She said, your performance. And I said, oh my God, great. A 22-year-old can track my cardiothoracic surgery performance. Do you do medical audits? She said, no, we do revenue audits. We know how much exactly you bring in, on what you bring in, why you bring in, which day you bring in, and you are not bringing enough, not even 10% of your salary. So you have 3 months time to pick up. Otherwise, you have to pack up. That man said, I thought I better stay retired. I packed up. And these are not exaggerations. These are actually happenings in this country. It happens in many places in the world. India is one of them. Why am I narrating all this? And what is common in all the incidents I said? What is common, my young friends, is a thread which is not seen. The thread of lack of trust, the thread of lack of interdependence, the thread of lack of reciprocity of human existence, the thread of what we had in this nation for a long, long time, which is missing. And what is all that? How do you really give it a name? What does human capital? It's a nice term, like Professor Natarajan said, those words were not even used in the past. They're hardly used even today, actually. Hardly anybody uses these terms because these are not terms business schools even want to talk about. But to me, the very purpose of TAPMI's existence or any business school's existence is this. And that is why I think it's extremely relevant to talk to young minds here. Because what you need to reflect on, I don't care if you even don't even remember my talk, but remember the topic. Please reflect on them. Because this country, this great country of ours, this country which today we are all proud of, we are all carried away by the optics and the visuals that we see on television. We all think we are a great country if the civil nuclear deal is signed. We all think we are a great country if traveling to Mars is cheaper than building a kilometer of road. It's actually a national shame that we think going to Mars is easier than building a road. A technology of building a road is thousands of years old, but we think going to Mars is more important. This country, this great country of ours, today, 65, 67, 67, 68 years after independence, still we live in a situation where 70% of Indians, mostly rural, don't have access to a toilet. We have the science and technology to go to Mars and the moon, but we don't have technology to send a man to a toilet. What a national shame. And why is it important for business? We live in a country where 54% of our children less than 5 are malnourished. And we don't even worry about it. 74% of women in this country, we talk of Nari power on Republic Day, without realizing 74% of the same women in this country are anemic or iron deficiency anemia. Silly 12 rupees a year can take care of their anemia, but we don't worry about it. It's not important to us because we are so obsessed with our own lives, with our own degrees, with our own all that we want to achieve in life, that we don't think of anything else. We have all become experts in dehumanizing ourselves, concerned about ourselves. We have forgotten that a society outside exists. And look at the past. The same country, I'm not even sure how many of you young students, if you have not, please go read this. You're all experts in Google. I know most of my students, as I'm talking, they're Googling in the classroom. And somebody will raise their hand and say, oh, professor, I think you're not trying the correct things. I ask him why. He says, Google doesn't agree with you. And I tell my students, no smartphones, no laptops, no iPads. Not because 80% of the time they're on Facebook, that is different. But 20% of the time to save my own reputation. Because Google seems to know more than me all the time. But jokes aside, many, many years ago, a British economist, some of you here might have read his work, was commissioned to write by the world body UN to write a report on the world's economy. And it was a very simple exercise. They just asked him to write a report based on which country on a sustained basis had the highest GDP, and they wanted to crack the code and say why. The financial crisis had started the whole process. They were wondering what went wrong, and rightfully they thought if we can understand what went right for other countries, we might be able to figure it out. So the simple question was just track the economic growth of countries around the world for the last 2000 years. And if there's a lesson for all of us in that, let's learn it. So Angus Maddison was this great economist who was given this mandate, and he's published a beautiful report called the World Economy Report, A Millennial Perspective. And I would ask my young friends to read it up. What you learn in classrooms are important, but actually what you learn outside your classroom is more important. These are the things which are more important for you. And he said his analysis is very simple. First century CE, the post-Christian era, the country which ruled the world economically was India. Understandable, because there are only two major civilizations, maybe a little bit of Mesopotamia, Egypt, but India and China were ruling the world, so obviously they will be. America didn't even exist as a country, so you can't even expect it to be on the graph. Europe was busy fighting amongst themselves, wondering, Jesus Christ preached love, but his followers for a long time did not. So they were all fighting, trying to say, everybody should be a Christian, otherwise I'll kill you. So Europe was lost in bloodshed. So it was understandable India will be number one. They kept tracking year after year, century after century after century. 10th century CE, India still was number one. Now for 1,000 years, if a country is leading in GDP and growth, there was something working in the damn country. Thankfully, we didn't have the central government at that time, so it was working maybe. And then, okay, we thought just fluke. Most countries have not even emerged as countries. America still does not exist. So India is maybe leading for 1,000 years. Till 1600, my friends, you got to understand this. For some reason, and we got to understand that reason, not simply be emotional and say India was a great country. We got to understand why was India a great country? What made it great? Till 1600 CE,